take two. We're here to talk with Steven Unruh about divorce mediation and how that works for him. So hopefully he can get the link and come on in, and we can talk about what he does, because he amazes me. He just amazes me at how effective he is with couples and how he doesn't let go until there's a solution to be found. And that amazes me. So I don't know, if you guys are therapists or, what you are, but if you are a therapist or even a member of a couple, like sometimes we need a little bit of help, right? Couples, that's a lot of hard work, don't you think, to be a couple? It's a big deal. There's no easy way about it. And yet, we feel drawn to be in a couple, whether it's, opposite sex or same sex or however that works. But even relationships between our kids, it's important. So, still waiting for Steven. Let me ask him if you got the link. It could be that, so you do go through stuff with your wife, and couples, they are, I think, easier than people realize to work with. So many of the times you guys get stuck in right fighting, like, I'm right, no, I'm right, no, I'm right, no, I'm right, and that doesn't matter. You're both right. I always tell my couples, the first thing I say to them when they get started is that you're both right. And that, because perception is reality, right? So if you let go of that, then the fact is that that you're both right. And let's let that off your shoulders and start talking about the difference between up here is the content and down here is the processing. And that processing is the real deal. It's really what's actually going on. Whether you don't feel heard or you don't feel loved, I think it comes down to that. And I actually think my saying from Dr. Seuss, be who you are, say what you feel, because those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. I honestly think most couples' issues comes down to that. Somebody in the relationship is not speaking up. So that is part of your issue. That's what I see. And if one person isn't saying their authentic truth, then you're not having a real relationship. You're having stories in your head. So you're telling yourself, that person, I know them so well, I know what they're thinking, I know what they're feeling, and yet the truth is you don't. And the only way to do that is to do a check-in with your partner and say, what are you thinking and feeling? I'm not going to tell myself a story that I know what you're thinking and feeling, but instead I'm going to say, how are we? How are we doing? Daryl, what do you do for a living? Can you tell me? Because does that affect even the time that you spend? Well, I guess Steven's not going to be able to show today, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off, and I'm going to probably do a real quick catch up with me and get into work. So I will wait, here we go. Wait, we got him. We got Steven coming in. Yes, he's being added. This is wanted. You're trying. That's hard. Hey, you figured it out?
Hi, Carol. How are you?
I'm fine. What happened?
Well, I did not have the app on my phone. I didn't realize
Oh,
There's like a Facebook app. I have Facebook on my phone.
got it.
And so there's an app. How about that? You can go to your apps, and I had to not only sign up for the app, but I had to then find you in my 100 million friends. And so,
I I'll BS on that. I don't think you, because the truth is, Facebook only gives you 5,000.
all right. Well, let's get going. What are we talking about?
Okay, well, we were talking about couples and some of the issues that couples have. So,
Okay.
what do you run across? Because this is your gig. So, what kind of problems do you see that couples run up against?
I think the strongest issue tends to be intimacy. I know that's a broad word, but it's a sense of being known.
Yeah.
Then in that vulnerability, especially in a marriage, when you are known and you expose yourself and the other person doesn't respond appropriately, doesn't really take you into consideration, you pull back, you shut down. And a lot of times I've seen in couples where if someone tends to answer enraged or in a very less than inviting comment, the other party pulls back right away, and suddenly you have this distance that's being created. Well, as a mediator, I work in divorce mediation. It's just accentuated 100 times. The vulnerability is gone. People are just reacting to one another, and it's difficult to get them to even talk about what they could agree upon when they go through a divorce.
It's so interesting because I was just saying on one of these videos, I believe in the Dr. Seuss quote, be who you are and say what you feel, because those who mind don't matter and those who matter don't mind. I
Mm.
honestly think couples kind of come down to that as the first problem, which is that somebody is not speaking their authentic voice. And like you said, they shut down.
Mhm.
Once somebody stops speaking, then you don't even have a real relationship going on. It's just the story you're telling yourself in your head.
Right. Right.
And so it's not like they shut down from the moment they start a relationship. They get baggage and then they start getting history and patterns of shutting down.
Right. And I think one of the, with what you're saying, the shutting down, when you do that, you really close off other people that could help you become realistic. Because when you are in a difficult marriage, a difficult situation, or even if you're facing divorce, we all tend to lose reality.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to think that we're right, this person is completely wrong, and we move into more of a black and white developmental phase whenever we're, traumatized. And difficult marriages are kind of in a trauma, as obviously going through a divorce is a trauma. And you lose reality. You lose how you're actually impacting the other person. You don't want to look at that, and you lose reality in terms of your expectations. You're really, I think, sometimes expecting this individual to always be available, to always be caring or thoughtful, and those expectations are going to come back and hurt you.
Well, first of all, just the word expectation just makes me push back because I consider those planned resentments. So you're planning to resent them because you're expecting something, and they may not even know that you're having an expectation. But the other
Right.
saying is about the right fighting. It's I'm right, I'm right, I'm right. But I think in terms of that I always tell my couples, you're both right. If perception is reality, you're both right. So let's let go of that part and just accept you're both right. So now let's get down to the real stuff is you don't feel loved and you don't feel heard.
Hmm.
To me, that's what I see. Like the bigger picture, every couple comes in saying he or she doesn't hear me and thus they don't love me.
Yes. Right. Right. Yeah. I think that's really powerful is when you don't feel heard and you don't feel respected in that sense. you either lash out and you become more critical,
Hmm?
um, but yet the self-criticism is pretty powerful. I think how we actually talk to other people is how we talk to ourselves. If we tend to be really critical with others, we're pretty critical with ourselves then. And
Sure.
I think that there's a sense in which that adage that says how we were parented is how we parent ourselves, and then it ends up being how we parent other people. It's how we treat others.
So interesting. So, as a couples therapist, one of my specialties, actually one of my favorite things to do is work with infidelity. I actually have
Hmm.
this system that's pretty fast that gets them through the process if they're willing to engage pretty fast and they can have healing. But when we can't get to resolution, I take out a stack of cards I have in my office of you,
Okay.
right? And I
Yeah.
say, what? This guy, he's a therapist, he's a mediator, he knows how to get a buy-in from somebody that's resistant to the process.
Hmm.
You're so good at that. You make them both feel like you're there for them both, which you are.
Hmm.
Is
Well,
it,
yeah, thank you, Carol. That it's hard to do that. Um, I
mhm,
remember even recently, someone was very angry because they they're going to pay pretty high alimony, and we negotiate that, we try to work that down, we try to make it reasonable,
mhm.
but they were wondering how I represented them and why, if they're paying such a high alimony, what was I doing on their part to represent them? And actually, I was able to show them how the number of years had been decreased and
Mhm.
how even alimony was going to be decreased by him giving part of his equity in the home to her. He hadn't worked in 24 years. And so there is a sense that even if it doesn't look fair, it is. It's quite fair. It's just that you have to give up something in order to gain something, even in a divorce. There has to be negotiation. And so if somebody wants their freedom, they want a divorce, well, part of that is then taking responsibility for what the laws in California require.
Wow.
They require either child support or alimony or some kind of financial remuneration. But clearly, my goal is to represent both parties and to represent them as fairly as possible.
What's the hardest part of doing the mediation?
That's a good question.
Hi.
Yeah. I think probably a difficult part would be when you're coming up against some pretty strong personality disorders.
Mm-hmm.
When someone is blaming everybody, and so of course I fall in that category. I'm at fault for something. So
Mm-hmm.
when they're very narcissistic, the problem with that is that there's a lack of observing ego, and so what happens is everything again becomes black and white. They're not at fault. They shouldn't be in this position. They shouldn't be going through a divorce. They shouldn't have to pay for alimony. But when that narcissism becomes really aggressive and and almost attacking, uh, that's a little bit more unsettling. But I'm trained to hold my own and to listen, to do reflective listening
Yeah.
in some pretty intense situations. But I'm assertive enough to set boundaries. And I've stood up at times and ended a meeting and said, "Oh, we're going to take a break, and you're going to leave the office and get some water." So
I love
one of
that.
us is, but it's a challenging field to be in, divorce mediation. I don't know why. For some reason, I like it.
Well, I guess it's your calling. But I was thinking the ego syntonic, the personality disorders, the ones that don't think there's something wrong with them. You
Yeah.
Instead of the ones ego dystonic, where they're like, I don't like this, I want help. And when you're dealing with those ego syntonic, where they're just convinced it's everybody around them and not them, that's one of the hardest things to deal with as a therapist.
Mm-hmm. It is. It is because you want to help them. They're in your office,
Mm-hmm.
and when they're so resistant to actually facing themselves and being honest with themselves, you in various ways, you have to ask questions, you have to probe, and you're trying to bring out some of the parts to this conflict that they've created. And a narcissist is very resistant to that. One of the things is when someone does not want the divorce, let me put it that way. When I work with a couple and someone's very much against it, they then think they get to blame the other person a lot more because they're not in favor of the divorce. And probably half of my cases, someone is really strongly against the divorce.
Mm-hmm.
But what I do to bring more balance is I'll say on a number of occasions, both of you have made decisions to bring yourself to this place. Both of you have made decisions over the past number of years that have brought you here today. It's not just one person's fault because they're filing for divorce. It could be against their faith, their background, religion, against their family traditions. That parents or their family never got divorced. Their parents never got divorced. So it goes against a lot of their values, but they still participated, whether they were unavailable, I heard a story where someone just didn't show up for Christmas. Oh, well, where were you? And they make decisions that are destructive or, distancing. So my point with that is that even if someone's against it, they've participated
Mm-hmm.
in creating an environment that brought about a divorce.
Well, it's kind of like the 100-100. It's not 50-50, but it's 100%, 100%.
Yeah,
So if you either bring it all in or you don't bring it all in, that's going to make the difference whether that relationship is going to be successful.
right. Yeah, that's right.
Distancing thing, to me, that's like a protection, and it's also about how worthy am I to have somebody loving. I think I'll self-sabotage.
Hmm.
So I see that a lot.
I bet you do. You work a lot with couples, and
I
I
do.
know you're an excellent clinician. And both of us being in this field, you can see how people devalue themselves.
Mhm.
And yet, when we do that, we're not going to be as generous with our own spirit. We're feeling like we're lacking. And so as a result, we're going to be treating and coming across other people as if we're always needy and always wanting something from them, rather than being able to be giving and generous ourselves. And so I think when people enter into therapy and can work on celebrating themselves.
Mhm.
Dorothy Briggs, when I first went into therapy a long time ago, in my 20s, and yeah, 20 years ago, right, that one of the first books I was given was Dorothy Briggs called Celebrate Yourself. I don't even know if it's in print anymore, but it was quite a concept, having been a Baptist. Baptists are worms and we're, sinners and horrible. And so for me to read a book that I could celebrate myself and my uniqueness, and that I really was a creation of God, made a little lower than the angels. And it was wonderful. It was amazing to begin to honor who I was in God's image.
Mm. So, how did that affect you as a therapist, having read that book?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was very powerful. As I then went on to graduate school and started studying to become a therapist and went into that field, then the more therapy I got, a foundation was that I could recognize who I was, at least in my faith, a child of God, that I had value, that God loved me and created me. And as I began to accept myself, my flaws and my uniqueness, um, I think it's been very difficult for me to accept some of my gifts. And even the word some, you see, I have to put out some. I can't have gifts. I have to have some gifts. And that's sort of going to be my lifetime
Were you
Achilles
making it
heel.
smaller? Are you doing that? I'm going to be smaller. You have a lot of gifts, and you're kind of a big character. I don't see you as little.
Yeah, well, thanks. But it's interesting is that I think that again, coming from a very German family, the lack of affirmation that I had growing up,
Yeah.
My own Achilles heel is honoring myself and recognizing what I can do. I remember I was so worried years ago. I thought I was losing my mind that I went through all this testing at Kaiser, and they were like, "Okay, get out of here, don't come back." I was fine,
Mhm.
and but I think that, anyways, it's sort of a tangent of how I maybe needed something, in writing to tell me that I was smart. I couldn't say it to myself.
Right. Well, that affirmation stuff is powerful, especially for men. I think that you need to be affirmed for sure as a man, and that's one thing that I'm always trying to teach women in a couple relationship is tell him he's a good dad, tell him he's a good, you know,
Yeah,
husband. He needs
right,
that.
right.
You guys need to feel like I mean, I don't want to speak for the man, but
Yeah,
I my feeling is that you want to feel like you can be successful as the mate. And if you feel
mhm,
like you can't, then you kind of shut down.
right, right, right. And I think,
You're looking like, how does she know that stuff?
but we have we've been in a culture from, obviously, decades, in which men are not expected to need affirmation, and that's changing. That's changing
That's
significantly.
cool.
Yeah, yeah.
That's,
It's the old school was, men didn't need that. They were strong. They were independent, and yet it was devastating because you would end up raising men who felt inadequate. In fact, if I were to exploit my dad, he's turning 90 this year. My growing up, he had a huge church before big churches. I mean, this was before you had big churches.
mm,
And he had a ministry and a radio show, and he traveled, he did all kinds of things. He was larger than life. And he went on, in his life and his career and his preaching, to be larger than life. But I remember just a few years ago, after all of his accomplishments, asking him if he felt adequate. That's the word. Do you feel adequate? And he said, every day I felt inadequate. No one would have ever imagined that my dad would have felt inadequate.
yeah.
It was a secret to us, but I think it's that lack of affirmation
Yeah.
that men receive. We don't think about it.
Well, there's the other thing is that the media makes men look foolish and
Mm.
fathers look foolish. And, I see that all the time. And I think we don't affirm men enough. And, I kind of, when I'm doing couples counseling, I will tell the man, women are kind of difficult to deal with. We can be control freaks. And they're like, yes, you're saying,
But at least you're never overreactive, right? That's good.
right. So, I have a friend that says there's a psycho in every woman. You just got to look deep enough and you'll find it in her. And yet the guy, there's kind of like the guy is kind of more chill. So we're made to be that way, which, us both believing in God, I still wonder if he's not looking down, laughing, and just where's entertainment?
Oh my goodness, that would be quite entertaining, I know. But the fact is that if men felt more adequate, and through our own therapy, through friendships, through our dads, through our parents affirming us, that then when our partners and spouses, um, when they overreact, we don't have to run away. We don't
Yeah.
have to be overwhelmed.
You
But
don't
in our
take it personal. Really, it has everything to do with them, not to do with you.
right,
The
right,
separate that is so important.
yeah.
And you must have to do that with mediation like that. I'm just guessing because I've never been in that room with you.
There is, I do. It's not quite exactly counseling, but certainly being a therapist when I'm doing divorce mediation, there are times I'll caucus and send someone out of the room and have to focus on this one individual. And I will then affirm them and I will encourage them. Not that I can't do it in front of the other spouse also,
Mm.
but there's something that they're, especially with a man, kind of hearing from another man that, you know, you are a good father and you care about these kids.
Yeah.
And if you keep prolonging this process, it's going to hurt them. And so when I can speak to them and affirm them, it's amazing, because sadly, most men have not had a father love them and encourage them and build them up. Instead, it's usually been a father that's fairly critical.
Well, because that was old school. Old school is you provide.
Yeah.
So that's your job. You, as long as you're providing, whether or not you're connected to the family, around the kids, loving, supportive, you just provide and kind of,
Right. Yeah. When,
eat, sleep.
in fact, I mean, my dad has become a very good friend of mine now. It's amazing how he's changed. But an example of his upbringing, or his raising of us, actually, too, besides his upbringing, I shared a story with him that I've probably brought up a couple of times, because I obviously I needed more clarification. Obviously, it was still an issue and painful for me. And I just needed some resolution from him. But what was funny, when I brought it up, his first response was, "Oh my goodness, that story gets worse every time I hear it."
Yeah, in a
I
month.
just broke out laughing, because I realized I had to find my own resolution.
Right,
It wasn't going to come from him, and that had to be
right,
okay.
right. And I think that's always true. Like, say we've gone through an experience where we want to confront our parents. Rarely do you ever hear somebody say, "Oh, yes, I did that and I'm sorry."
Yeah,
That
right.
happened, or that memory was not what you thought, or so you do have to give that to yourself,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
that situation.
yeah.
So I would love everybody to know how to reach you, how to, if you need mediation, where's your offices?
Oh, they're kind of all over, but that's because my kids are gone and I have more time. um, I have a part-time practice out in Brea, and so I'm there on Saturdays.
Okay.
And the thing is, people need to realize, when you go through a divorce, they don't meet every week, and they meet every 3 weeks, because it's so exhausting
Yeah.
pulling finances together, dealing with these issues. People are not happy to be coming in. It's not every week. So that allows me to have a couple different offices. Then my main office is Pasadena, and I do have a couple cases in Beverly Hills. That's uh, I share a colleague's office there I'm finishing up a case in Beverly Hills. My other main office is Westlake Village, so I know they're all kind of far apart, but I love the Ventura County. I would love to live in Oxnard, where it's about 30 degrees cooler every day.
Yeah.
So I am kind of all over Southern California. I'm not in the South Bay, but I've got good referrals for the South Bay.
My goodness. So basically, a couple can find which office is closer and which day
Right.
there, and kind of
Yeah.
that gives
Yeah.
them flexibility, which couples need.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
Carolyn, I wanted to just say one thing here.
Yeah.
You're on this theme of dads and sons. I guess I think it's a pretty powerful issue, because again, it does relate to our self-esteem, our sense of inadequacy, and that affects obviously how we treat people, especially those we're intimate with. The more inadequate we feel, the worse we treat people. And I'm right now working with an elderly gentleman and his adult son, after years and years of not communicating. And it's really wonderful. It's actually very powerful. I'm enjoying working with them. And it's a slow process. They're both kind of walking on eggshells. Their stories are very painful, but we're doing it. We're helping them learn how to trust each other and begin to bond.
But that's risky.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. You don't know if you're going to fall or not fall. To me, the risk of being hurt sometimes overtakes, the willingness to try.
Mm.
And
Yes. Right.
that's really
Right.
powerful. But if you can trust yourself that
Mm.
no matter what, you can handle something, that is so empowering.
Right. Right. And what's amazed me is the older gentleman, who comes from, a very corporate, high-powered, the other world from many couple decades ago, where, you know, men were in charge and men ruled, and he just got his way.
Mhm.
For his son to have said a couple of things, my eyes are kind of opening as I'm in the room thinking, what is he going to say? You know, and the dad just kind of nodded his head and took it.
Mm.
He heard it.
That's
You know,
really,
he didn't lash back or anything. So
wow.
it, you know, it's a powerful process, and I see so many men who need counseling and who don't go into counseling, and that loneliness brings about a divorce, because eventually they're lonely and they push people away, and their spouse says, yeah, I'm kind of tired of being alone here for 20 years.
Mm. Yeah. And yet they're doing that to themselves.
Right, right, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I mean, think about it. If they seek out help, then doesn't that mean that there's something profoundly wrong with them?
yeah,
Which is not true.
yeah,
It's their
right,
choice.
yeah, right, right. they've they're listening to the lies, you know, the lies from a childhood, or even the lack of input. If there weren't lies, maybe there was just a void, a sense of emptiness, so that they weren't really given information about themselves. That was more my childhood. Mine was one in which I kind of didn't know what's going on. Like,
Mm.
who's not, why is no one talking to me? I'll never forget when I was 18, my dad asked me, well, what are your plans? It was a month away. College was a month away. And I said, well, I'm going to college. He goes, well, you have to apply. And I had been accepted. He didn't even know what college I was going to. It was very bizarre.
Well, I don't think that's as bizarre as you think, because I mean, with many men, they think that's the mother's realm to know all those details, to talk to the teachers, to, you know, all that part. Their job is to provide.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
The difference is, and you have kids too, and
Finish.
I have kids. The difference is when you, I mean, I'm involved in traveling with them around the country, looking at their schools and helping them with applications. And, you know, it's such a different, it's wonderful. It's great. It's a different world.
But you've got three boys, and you had your own relationship with your dad that was somewhat damaged, and it seems like you wanted to pass down something else to your sons. That's what.
Yeah. Yeah. Carol, you're right. You're right. Yeah. My relationship with my dad was really devoid of any kind of intimacy. And so I just loved raising my boys. In fact, one of them is visiting me here. He's still in college from Minnesota. And um, they shared with me that they were with some cousins and aunts. And this would have been years ago. And they were laughing because when my kids were very little and all the cousins were little, one of my brother-in-laws would say to his girls, well, now, if Uncle Steve says it's okay, it's not. So come and talk to us. I thought that's great. What a vote of confidence.
So in their minds, your world was a little skewed, I guess.
Well, I was pretty wild. I mean, and my boys were wild, and they had girls, and so they're like, no, if Uncle Steve says it's okay, no, you can't do it.
Yeah. Well, no,
We were jumping off the roof. So yeah.
well, my sons, you know, I've got two of them. They're still, I mean, from what I understand, my son climbed the tower at his college, and they found out about it, the authorities, and they put a camera up there because of my son.
Well, good, good. He should put that on his resume.
I don't, yeah, that's, you know, they're out there doing what they got to do. And, you know, my daughter stays here with me, but my sons are living on the campus, and they're doing stuff. And there's just, you know, you got to just love them.
You do, you do. Well, I think my one of my kids, the middle one, his claim to fame is when he was removed from practice for being caught with marijuana, and it was a public school. If you can believe, it was pretty strict. And but the contract actually said and or there were no games, but and or no practice. And I went to bat for him. Now he got in trouble. He got grounded, but I still went to bat for him and made sure that he could go to practice. And the principal said, I've been here 14 years as a student,
Mhm.
as a teacher, as a vice principal, and I'm now the principal. And in 14 years, no one has ever gone to practice if they've been caught with marijuana. I said, yeah, but your contract allows that. So he got to go to practice, and 3 months later, the contract was changed. So his claim to fame is that he changed the school district contract.
Well, that's great. I mean, there's all kinds of things our children are doing.
Right. That's right.
Parent perfectly, and you know, we did things ourselves when we were young. So I
Yeah.
mean, how to
Right.
judge them, because you know the brain isn't fully formed. So they say 25, some people say 30.
Right. That's right.
So
But I think what we're sharing in some of these insights and stories is the need, I think, for men to feel adequate, for them to get the help to understand who they are, to recognize their gifts and their intelligence. And that's actually hard to do. It's still, I catch myself saying things or not saying things, not representing myself because it's just these old tapes that we have. But the more adequate we feel, the more capable we are of creating intimacy and affirming other people. And
right.
again, it's that we feel a lack of, we then are not generous with others.
Right. So if we come back to what I said earlier, it's just, to me, affirmations for a man is number one. And
Mm,
that's one of the love languages as well. It's still so important for men to have affirmation. I think for women to have
right.
security. And if they don't have those basic things, then the couple's going to have a problem
Right.
already, you know, just
Yeah.
from the beginning. And
Right.
we need to affirm ourselves.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
when you specialize in love language stuff, you
yeah.
know about that as a marriage counselor and a therapist. And it's interesting. I'm sure you've seen it. A woman's might differ from, I love touch, I love gifts, I
Mm-hmm.
love acts of service. I like when he cleans, when he helps out. For men, it's really consistent. It's being affirmed, being told I'm thoughtful, being respected. It's very interesting.
And usually physicality.
And what?
Physicality. They like to
Yes.
touch.
Those two things. You're right. Yep. Yep. They're kind of common.
Yes, I see that with couples again and again. And with women, often, you know, acts of service or quality time, or, you know, to me, if a guy takes out the trash and I don't have to ask him, he's won me over. That's all I need. It doesn't take much. If I don't have to ask for that, that is going to float my boat, so to speak.
Good. 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 Good.
So I figured that out. So let me just kind of wrap this up and
Great.
just, I recommend Steven Unruh. He's a good friend of mine, but that's not the reason I recommend him. I recommend him because I have sent, I don't know how many people to
Wow.
him. And I continue to do that because he really is a great therapist and a great mediator. He knows when to step forward and be masculine to deal with maybe somebody who's acting out in the room, and he knows when to be compassionate and kind. And I,
Mm,
because I get the feedback from my clients when they're seeing you. So for me, hands down, if there's a couple's issue that we're not going to work towards reconciliation, but they're working towards separation and or divorce, then the first thing I do is talk to Steven,
mm.
because so I trust him, and I know that I'm bringing that couple to good hands. So
Thank you, Carol. Thank you. I
I,
really appreciate that.
I mean that
Yeah.
sincerely. What is your website?
It's simply my name. So it's Steven Unruh, and Unruh is UNRUH. StevenUnruh.com.
Perfect.
Yeah. And
So
Unruh of course means unpeaceful. Actually, it means unruly, because Ru is peace, and so
you
Unruh
didn't know
uh,
this.
is unruly. And I think I've raised 3 unruly boys. Yeah.
Yeah, and we could talk about you sometime too, because
No, no, we're out of time. We're out of, we gotta go.
you're out of time. You're
All right,
fun.
well, we'll do this again. This was delightful. Thank you, Carol. I,
Absolutely.
I so appreciate your time and your friendship, and you as a person. You're a lovely person. I really care about you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
All
So
right.
we'll end with that and talk to Steven. If you guys have some couples that need some help, he's the guy to go to.
All right. Have a wonderful day, all of you. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Bye now.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.